Well, good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's XTalks webinar. Today's talk is entitled New Era of Obesity Drug Development. My name is Ryan Muse and I'll be your XTalks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. Now, the webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit your questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you require any assistance along the way, you can contact me at any time by sending a message using the same chat panel. I'd also like to welcome our attendees viewing this presentation from our LinkedIn Live event, and I encourage you to submit questions as well via the comments tab. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode, and please note that the event will be recorded and made available for streaming to those who registered on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Fortrea, who developed the content for this presentation. Fortrea is a leading global provider of clinical development and patient access solutions to the life sciences industry. They partner with emerging and large biopharmaceutical, medical device, and diagnostic companies to drive healthcare innovation that accelerates life-changing therapies to patients in need. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's event, Dr. Claudia Filizolov, Vice President and Therapeutic Area in Obesity, MASH, and Hepatology Indications with Fortrea. Claudia, it's on to you.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It is a great pleasure to be hosting this webinar today with an invited speaker of the caliber of Dr. Rabusin. Dr. Eric Rabusin is not only a world expert in obesity and type 2 diabetes research, but it's also a good friend for at least 25 years. He published more than 700 peer-reviewed manuscripts in the field of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and aging, and he has mentored more than 60 postdoctoral fellows and several doctoral theses, including mine. In the next 50 minutes, we are going to go through the following topics. After a 10 to 12-minute introduction to this discussion, Dr. Rabusin will address the rationale for targeting beyond reduction in energy intake in obesity research. Dr. Peter Alfinito, Executive Director in Operational Strategy and Planning in Fortrea, will discuss some operational aspects in this new era of obesity drug development. The 2022 obesity maps show it again that obesity continues being an alarmingly and increasing global public health issue, but with notable differences by race, ethnicity, and also socioeconomic status. Worldwide obesity prevalence has doubled since 1990 to 2022, and there are 2.5 billion adults with overweight, and 16% of them had obesity at this year. The prevalence in Black and Latinos is higher, reaching almost 50% and 45%, and it's increasing also in Asian and those defined themselves as multiracial origin. Recent data suggests that no areas of the world is unaffected by the consequences of obesity, and the poorest suffer the most at ever younger ages. In the last half of the last century, we experienced periods of great excitement, followed unfortunately by failures and frustration, with several compounds in late stage being interrupted and some of the compounds even reaching the market with early withdrawn due to an unacceptable safety concern. It was only 10 years ago that the first GLP-1 agonist was approved for the treatment of obesity. and most recently semaglutide in 2021, another GLP-1 agonist, and last year tirzepatide, a dual GLP-1 GIP agonist, was approved for the treatment of obesity after some years in diabetes indication. It was late in the last century that a better understanding of the role of the enteropancreatic hormones in energy intake and energy homeostasis triggered the development of some signals that could be target for obesity research. These included signals from the gut, like GLP-1, GIP, and PYY, but also from the pancreas with glucagon and amylin, and also from the adipose tissue, like adiponectin and leptin. And there are several incretins in clinical trials at present, and the number is growing, and the hope is becoming higher and higher. Last year, for instance, the retatrutide phase 2 data was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, reporting a 25% weight loss in the highest dose arm, with 100% of the patients reaching the old response rate of 5%, well, the still acceptable response rate of 5%. This slide is summarizing the number of studies in clinical trials, starting by decade on the right and by year on the left. It is evident the limited number of studies in the last decade, in the last century, and the abrupt increase in the last 20 years. Only in the last 4 years, from 2020 to 2024, the number of studies that are starting in adult population, interventional studies sponsored by industry, are 4 times the numbers, starting with 35 in 2020 and expecting to overpass 130, 140 in 2024. In the next few minutes, I would like to summarize some of the aspects that will introduce the topic that we are discussing today and that Dr. Rabusin is bringing later. Now that a 2-digit weight loss is achievable, we are working with the hope that a better quality of weight loss can be achieved. As we all know, obesity is defined as excess body fat, and the association between body fat and BMI is acceptable around 0.7. But as you can see in the slide, there are a meaningful number of patients with a BMI between 25 and 30 that have high amounts of body fat. Another important component is the body fat distribution. And last but not least, how we can work for long-term weight maintenance. Preservation of lean body mass and selected loss of mass is one of the components that may help with this objective. It's not the objective of this webinar to discuss about the methodologies to assess body composition. We can dedicate a full webinar to this topic, but this slide is just to highlight that after several years having underwater weighing or hydrodensitometry as the gold standard to estimate body composition as fat mass and fat-free mass, the science evolved, and with large advancements in the last 20 years, not only DEXA being now the gold standard that replaced the underwater weighing, but can also give us the opportunity to estimate regional fat and not only total body fat. There were also great advancements in terms of magnetic resonance imaging, not only to discriminate subcutaneous versus abdominal fat, allow the estimation of muscle fat, but also with recent AI algorithms that with just a few slides can allow the estimation of total body fat. summarized in this slide, patients with normal weight, overweight, or obesity, all of them can be metabolically healthy or unhealthy. And estimating distribution of body fat with waist circumference, waist height ratio, waist triglyceride ratio, all these index are helping to estimate the real risk of metabolic and cardiovascular comorbidities that these patients may have. And as the last slide for this introduction, I wanted to bring this recently published paper from a few authors representing the European Association for the Study of Obesity. There are ongoing initiatives to align the diagnosis, staging, and management of obesity. However, there are a few messages that I wanted to bring to finalize this short introduction. Obesity is an adiposity-based chronic disease and not just the lack of willpower to follow a healthy diet or to exercise. Abdominal fat, and specifically visceral fat, is an important factor for health deterioration and needs to be estimated. And the management of obesity should move beyond weight loss. One final comment that this article brought was not only the importance to assess fat mass and fat-free mass, but also muscle strength and performance in order to early identify some subpopulations with higher risk of sarcopenic obesity. And without any further delay, I would like to introduce Dr. Eric Rausin so he can go through his presentation.
Thank you very much, Claudia, for this very informative introduction. I've been tasked to talk about targeting beyond energy intake. And we know I've been for 50 years in this area of obesity research, and I think that we are at the golden era now with some so potent medication to target this disease. On the next slide, I want just to introduce you to my encounter. If you can switch to the next slide. I have been tasked basically to talk about preserving against the decrease in energy expenditure. That's true that when we decrease body weight, there is a obligatory decrease in energy expenditure, but there is also what we call a metabolic adaptation. We become more efficient. And it's true that this is one of the problems with weight loss maintenance, because you are fighting against this more efficient energy metabolism. And the second thing is really, and Claudia mentioned that, we should not talk only about fat mass, body weight, but we should know the quality of the weight loss. Is that fat-free mass? Is that skeletal muscle? I mean, you don't want to lose your brain, etc., etc. And I think that with the kind of weight loss that we are achieving right now, there is a concern about the quality of the weight loss. And then we know that one mechanism is not going to target. There is redundancy in humankind in terms of protecting us against weight loss. And I think that we need to target many mechanisms. And I think that this is what we are engaging on now. Even with all these peptides, we don't know exactly what they are doing, but they are doing many things which are favorable for weight loss. And I think we need also to have a better assessment of what these peptides do in terms of energy intake and what are the mechanisms for that. On the next slide, I want to introduce you to my, I studied my PhD in the late 70s and was tasked basically to measure energy expenditure in people. And one of them, my primary mentor was J.P. Flatt, who was a professor at University of Massachusetts, Worcester, who told me energy balance is not just energy in and energy out, but it's really carbohydrate in versus carbohydrate out, protein in versus protein out, and fat in versus fat out. And I became much more interested in not just measuring energy expenditure, but measuring what are the substrate oxidized to generate this energy expenditure. On the next slide, I want just to show you the methods that we've been using. You have basically your total daily energy expenditure is composed of the sleeping energy expenditure, then the cost of arousal, I mean being sleeping versus awake, and become your basal metabolic rate. You have this energy cost of being awake. Then the thermic effect of food, which has also been called the dietary intake thermogenesis. And on the top of that, you have energy expenditure for physical activity, either voluntary physical activity, you go running or jogging or bicycle, or what is called fidgeting or spontaneous physical activity, which is to move a little bit more. Now we can measure very precisely all these different components. The total can be measured by doubly labeled water, like you see on the right-hand side of the slide, and all the other components can be measured either in room calorimeters or with the Hood system to measure your basal metabolic rate. On the next slide, I want just to tell you some of our early studies showing that, you know, energy expenditure is important when it comes to body weight regulation. And we did these studies in Pima Indians. I was invited by NIH to build the first metabolic chamber in North America, in Phoenix, Arizona, and we did a lot of measurements of energy metabolism, 24-hour energy expenditure. And like for BMI versus body fat, at any body size, there is a large variability in energy expenditure. And we looked at this variability. Is that involved in further prospective weight gain? And the answer was yes. And on the left panel, you can see that you have people with a low energy expenditure in green versus people in blue who have a high energy expenditure. And it was done in hundreds of Pima Indians. And we followed them for 4 years. These were early publication in the New England in the late 80s. And we found that those who had low metabolic rate were much more likely to gain weight. It means energy expenditure is also a marker of the propensity to weight gain or to resist to weight gain. We also looked at the substrate utilization, and on the right panel here, you have in open triangle, you have basically people with a high fat oxidation versus in the closed circle, people with a low fat oxidation. And once again, independent of energy expenditure, we found that the high fat oxidizers were less likely to gain weight. Taken together, it means energy metabolism is important. But how much of the weight gain was explained by energy metabolism? It was less than 25%. And I think that still the major target is food intake, but we have to take into account this energy metabolism. On the next slide, I'm presenting here our approach to look at that. And what we did is to take people and we either overfeed them for a day or two or starve them for a day or two. And we discovered that there were some people in response to overfeeding who were spendthrift. It means they increased their metabolic rate quite considerably, resisting the weight gain. And there were some people thrifty, with less of an increase. And during fasting, complete fast, we found exactly the same thing. Some people in response to 24-hour fasting have a drop of maybe 15% of their energy expenditure, and some people over only 5%. And we then took some of these people here. This is a case of 12 people. They were inpatient on our metabolic ward in Phoenix, and we put them on a calorie-restricted diet. And we found that this phenotype, being spendthrift or thrifty, was associated with weight loss. It means, once again, energy expenditure or fat oxidation also are major contributors to the level of weight loss and also the quality of weight loss. On the next slide, I want just to share with you some data from The Biggest Loser. I was invited to do measurements of energy metabolism in The Biggest Loser. It was season, I think it was 11. We had 11 people here on whom we had measurement at baseline, week 6 of the competition, and week 30. You may recall that The Biggest Loser was basically taking people with obesity, putting them on a exercise regimen, very, very stringent, but also they were chasing $250,000 for the winner, and they cut down the calories. And you can see that the weight loss was quite spectacular, from 145 kilos at baseline to 87 kilo at 30 a year after a year of the competition. And on the next slide now, I want to show you basically their measurements of energy expenditure, and this is only metabolic rate. We measured the basal metabolic rate with the Hood system, and we measured their body composition by DEXA, which is now, like Claudia said, the gold standard to measure body composition. Now you can see on the left-hand side of the slides, those are the women, and on the right-hand side, the men. Now, what do you expect? And if you can push one click, Claudia.
Yeah, you have it there. Okay, one more.
Yep. You can see that some people, in response to weight loss, are going to decrease their energy expenditure in a shallow way, where some other people have a much steeper slope. And this is what is metabolic adaptation, is really to decrease your energy expenditure more than what you would expect on the basis of the loss of fat-free mass and fat mass. On the next slide, I can show you now the the story was taken by the New York Times and all that. We remeasured these people 5 years later. During the competition at baseline, 6 weeks and 1 year, and then 5 years later. First of all, a lot of these people, and those are data with their names because they were published in the New York Times, you can see that the winner, who is in brown, regained quite some weight. Sorry. The second one, who was in yellow here, regained quite some weight and decided to go on bariatric surgery. And this is what you see with this yellow line going up and then down. But what was impressive, this metabolic adaptation, or this efficiency of energy metabolism, was still present 5 years later. It means you fight a low metabolic rate after losing weight. Next slide. Now, let me take more of this data. You can see The Biggest Loser on the upper left corner, and these are the data from these people. And then we had also similar data from gastric bypass surgery. But now, it takes longer to lose the same amount of weight with gastric bypass. And we combine these two groups, and the major predictor of this weight, this energy reduction with weight loss was your leptin level. You can see that on the x-axis on the top, a lot of these biggest loser, leptin was undetectable. And now in the gastric bypass, which are the squares, you can see that there is still some leptin, but the drop was from 20% from baseline to about 80 or 90%. But the metabolic adaptation, or this energy efficiency, was related to this leptin concentration. Next slide. Now, we know that leptin is important, not only on the reproductive axis, but it's a modulator of your sympathetic nervous activity versus parasympathetic nervous activity. That's a modulator of thyroid hormones. And these two characteristics, the sympathetic nervous axis as well as the thyroid hormones, are very important when it comes to your energy expenditure. And I think that's one of the mechanisms by which the energy expenditure become much lower than what you would predict on the basis of the weight loss. Next slide. Here, I think that we had with NIH a basically meeting to discuss what are the mechanisms affecting the metabolic efficiency. You know that there are free fatty acid oxidation in skeletal muscle. Basically, you burn free fatty acid, then you remake the free fatty acid, and it costs energy. You have futile cycles consuming ATP, hydrolysis of triglyceride, and subsequent reesterification. You have energy consumption consuming process. If you make lipogenesis, it costs you energy. Gluconeogenesis costs you energy. You have a lot of modulators of your energy expenditure, and with weight loss, basically you become in general much more energy efficient. Next slide. Now, let me summarize this part. You have, and you can animate, go back, you go to switch, Claudia. You have basically what I told you with weight loss. Either you can be like 2B, the green circle here, you can kind of follow the line of prediction on the basis of the population, or you can have a sharp drop in energy expenditure. And what we noticed is that it is a determinant of the magnitude of the weight loss. Now, you always hear there are failures with weight loss strategies, lifestyle and so on, but now even with potent medication like GLP-1, there are some people, despite the fact that they take their medication, who are struggling with weight loss. And they may have these mechanisms of basically energy efficiency and so on. Next slide. I want just now to summarize, when I entered this field, and that's why I'm telling you this is the golden era of basically obesity research, because we had lifestyle intervention. It works. You lose 5%, maybe 7%. If you have Tom Warden or Gary Foster as your coach, you are a little bit better than others, but it's still a maximum of 10%. Then we had the pharmacotherapy that Claudia presented, and then we had the bariatric surgery. And I think when I was advising for companies or even working for pharma, I mean, the goal was becoming to equal bariatric surgery. And fortunately, we are there. It's amazing that now we are achieving not 15, but 20%, even 25% weight loss with pharmacotherapy. Now, if you click, the problem becomes the magnitude of the weight loss is really drastic, and we may be losing an excess fat-free mass. Now, you all hear skeletal muscle. It's very, very seldom measured. What is measured is fat-free mass by DEXA, but fat-free mass is water. Fat-free mass is protein from tissue like liver and so on. It's protein from also skeletal muscle. And now we have really to identify this as a problem and targeting this weight loss being fat-free mass, and especially skeletal muscle. On the next slide, this is in a publication. We kind of describe, and you will have access to these slides, I believe. We describe the different strategy, and now you know that there are strategies to decrease the loss of fat-free mass or the loss of skeletal muscle by targeting, for example, the activin type 2 receptor, which binds myostatin. And you know that myostatin is an inhibitor of muscle mass development. And for example, you have the Belgian blue cattle with a very massive cattle with a lot of muscle, and this is part of the strategies that now pharma are trying to combine with protectors of weight loss as skeletal muscle. Next slide. Now, let's just summarize. Bimagrumab block, like I said, the actin receptor type 2, and you have these different compounds which are studying extensively because there is a need now to protect against the potential weight loss as skeletal muscle, especially if you target people at an older age with obesity. Already you have sarcopenia happening with age, over the age of 65 and so on. Now, if you want to target the obesity and you give them some drugs like that, you may really precipitate this sarcopenia, and I think we have to pay attention to that. Next slide. Now, I want just to finish by, I think for the sake of time, I'm going to just summarize that there is an important distinction between weight loss and weight loss maintenance. And I think we have to be cognizant of that. This is two different physiology. Weight loss is what pharma is targeting. It's what we are doing pharmacologically. But after that, there is weight loss maintenance. And it may not be the same strategy. We know that you have to continue to take agent to help you. It's like hypertension. If you stop your drug, you get your hypertension back. But the strategy may be different. And I think that this is a very, very important future research to try to change from a GLP-1 or combination to something else, or to titrate down when you have reached the plateau after 9 or 12 months, to titrate down these compounds, introduce something else to basically curb the metabolic adaptation. On the next slide, I want just to introduce this concept. And when I joined Lilly in the late 90s, I presented this slide at my first town hall meeting to say appetite suppressant is really the holy grail for weight loss. But after that, when you reach this plateau, why not introducing compounds, increasing energy expenditure, increasing fat oxidation? And I think this is where we are at. And at that time, it was a beta-3 agonist that Lilly was developing for boosting up energy expenditure. Then we had the brown adipose tissue as a target for that. And I think that this is important to keep that in mind. Now, just to conclude 3 or 4 slides, we know that there's not only the metabolic adaptation, which is counteracting further weight loss or which is favoring weight regain, but there is also your appetite. And this study published more than 10 years ago from Australia is showing that after a period of 10 weeks of weight loss, intensive weight loss, the appetite of these people, and it's on the right-hand panel, after in red and blue, in blue after 10 weeks or 62 weeks in red, they were still hungry. I mean, these people are still hungry. It means they want to eat more. And on the next slide, I'm showing here the anorexic orexigenic hormone like ghrelin, which is still up a year after the weight loss, or the anorectic peptides like amylin, like PYY, like CCK, which are still down. And I think we need to really better understand these mechanisms of counter-regulation. And on the last two slides, I want just to show you where we are going now. Let's skip to the next one for the sake of time, because I'd like to have some question. But I think we should really be much more rigorous in trying to study by functional MRI all what are the characteristics of these desire to eat, this lack of satiation, these satiety problems. And I think that functional MRI, either with presentation of food, you can click to the next one, or the ingestion of food or the smell of food, what are the characteristics of these response are very, very important. And we have some preliminary data which are summarized on the next slide, showing that in lean people, basically the viewing of food is eliciting an activation when they are fasted, and it elicits less activation when fed compared to people with obesity. And here, this is a summary again from these studies, but I think we need many more studies like that. We're doing fantastic progress when it comes to basic science using, rats or mice and going into the CNS. But we are very, very poor in our knowledge in adult, and I think that this is an important area of research. And I think that this is my last slide, if I recall correctly. If you can go to the next one. Oh, okay, now it's another summary slide, but I will spare you of this conclusion. But I think overweight adults may show less activation in inhibitory control in response to strategies of either caloric restriction or overfeeding. In other words, more prone to weight gain in presence of overfeeding, and less weight loss in conditions of caloric restriction. Thank you very much, Claudia. Sorry
Thank
to have
you. Absolutely, absolutely. Amazing presentation. We have already several questions. I would like to inform the audience that we will go to as many questions as we can, but we will continue answering by email if we cannot address all the questions today. Peter?
Yeah, hi, thanks everyone for joining. My name is Peter Alfinito. I'm an executive director at Fortrea in the Operational Strategy and Planning Group. I think the science behind energy expenditure is really exquisite. And clearly the epidemiology and the market is there in obesity, but at some point our attention has to turn to how are we going to turn that science into a marketed drug. I know many of the folks on the call today are probably at a sponsor with their own program in place. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about operational challenges, but in the context of how the field is changing. So we're going to talk here about some of the major changes that we're going to have to contend with. Then in the next two slides, talk about some of the operational challenges, and then looking forward into the future, what are the key operational challenges that we're really going to have to focus on in this area? So I think everyone understands that the biggest thing to happen is the approval of the GLP-1 and the GLP-1 GIP mimetics. The effects of the approval of those safe and efficacious drugs on operations are pretty significant. What we've seen is that someone has cleared the path. Multiple companies have cleared the path, and other companies are now seeing their own path to that same end. And so the competition, as Claudia mentioned earlier, is really heating up. It's been heating up for a year or so, but it's going to continue to increase. Operationally, we're going to have to manage through that and figure out, the best ways to keep the trials as efficient as possible. Scientifically, the drugs now have to do more than just weight loss. Dr. Ravison pointed out that we have to preserve fat-free mass. We have to have drugs that look to have impact on renal, cardiovascular, hepatic, or mental systems. So more than just having people lose weight, and that's going to be very challenging. I think you also have to contend with now, are you going to run a placebo or an active controlled trial? They both come with their own unique operational concerns. So if you're going to do a placebo-controlled study, you're going to have to deal with the dropout that's going to happen, maybe slower recruitment. If you're going to do an active controlled, obviously you've got a higher statistical bar or looking for non-inferiority, but you are going to get better recruitment and you are going to get better retention. It's just something that every company is now going to have to think through. But some of the things outside of the approval of those two drugs that are impacting the operations in clinical development are the regulatory requirements. The FDA has put in requirements around diversity action plans, and I think obesity has been a field, and we'll talk about it more later, where diversity has not been achieved, in the clinical trials, and there's real reasons for why that has occurred. But I think going forward, we're going to have to make a difference there. And then patient and site centricity. It's always been at the forefront of clinical research to be patient and site centric. We talk about that. However, during the pandemic, this really became heightened. Sites were struggling with resources. They didn't have money to buy masks and other ancillary supplies, and the sponsors and CROs kind of stepped up. And it really drew our attention to the sites and to the patients, and that has persisted. And now the expectation is that we are being truly site and patient-centric in everything that we do, really embracing them as our partners in clinical development. And so that's going to be something that as we move forward, we're going to see more of. And there's plenty of solutions out there. We're just going to have to put them in place. So if we move on to the next slide, let's talk about some of the operational challenges, and I've broken them down into recruitment, retention, and clinical plan strategy. And if you've been around long enough in clinical development to believe that rapid recruitment is a problem is hard. So many of us are dealing with trials where recruitment is delayed and behind, but it does come with its own challenges. So when you have rapid recruitment, it really impacts the site. It can impact their quality. You have to have the resources there to handle all those patients who are coming in. From a CRO perspective, you have to have a higher frequency of monitoring. You have to be able to check, that the patient eligibility is appropriate. You also have to be able to check that there aren't any duplicate patients. When trials burn really fast, people can sneak into multiple trials. So we do have a solution for that, a vendor that manages that, but those are challenges when you have such rapid recruitment. Some of the other things that happen is you get uneven spread at sites. Some sites start faster than other sites. Some sites pre-identify patients faster. And then there are going to be sites that are left behind that don't have the opportunity to recruit. And so that's a problem. I think I've talked to a number of sites who are frustrated, I would say, that they can't get enough patients in because they're a little bit behind. And I think there's some solutions that we can put in place for that as well. And then, as we spoke about just before, when you are rapidly recruiting, you're not really taking time to say, okay, do I have all the right ethnic and race backgrounds? Am I being diverse in my recruitment? You're just trying to get it enrolled. So that's going to change. That's absolutely going to change. It's a mandate. And so things operationally are going to change with respect to that. So some of the other considerations around retention, I think.
Sorry.
Okay, around retention are pretty standard things. One more, yeah, things that have been common. These aren't going to change a whole lot. Patients who are in a placebo or even on a drug that's maybe only moderately efficacious, they're going to have that perceived lack of efficacy. They want a quick effect. You're not always going to get a quick effect. Some people may start putting solutions in place during the trial. They may drop out, try other things. That's all common today, and that's going to be something that we still have to contend with moving forward. Tolerability, of course, is always a concern with any clinical development. And then, thinking about protocol design, one of the things we've learned since the pandemic is that one of the best drivers of enrollment and retention is really having a patient-centric and a site-centric protocol. And so that's going to be very important. We'll talk about that again on the next slide. And then in terms of the clinical plan, some of the things that we think about, everybody in this field wants rapid enrollment with few sites. And that's been the paradigm, that's been the standard. You can enroll hundreds of patients in 3 to 4 months. I think as we move forward into the future and we start thinking about diversity and taking into account the competition, that paradigm may shift a little bit. You may have to add more sites, you may have to add a little bit more time. But in general, smaller studies, and I'm saying smaller is 500 or less, can generally be done in the US. It has the fastest startup. If you try to recruit an obesity study in Europe and the US, the European counterparts, they're not going to have time. I think the one country where you could go is Canada. They have similar startup timelines at their central IRBs. So a North America, US, Canada study, for a smaller study is fine. Once you get into the larger studies, though, 500 patients or more, thousands of patients, now you're talking about a global study. There aren't a shortage of sites to select from. And I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is just where is your competition going? I think if you looked at Lilly and Novo, what they did in their phase 3s is they avoided each other. They largely went to countries that the other wasn't in. And I think that's a legitimate paradigm in obesity because the patients are everywhere. And, if you have long timelines to recruit thousands of people, and then, you can use all the countries you need to use. And then if you're thinking about a mechanistic study, a study such that like Dr. Ravison would conduct, energy expenditure or body composition, there are very limited options. In the US, you have about 3 sites that can do it, and then there's about 4 more globally. And I think, if you're thinking about doing a mechanistic study for your compound, obviously getting into those, proactively planning to get into those centers and develop relationships with those sites is critical. So let's move on to the last slide. So what are we thinking about in terms of the future? What are the key areas? I've mentioned them already. I've got them here on the left. You've got patient and site centricity, addressing diversity, and managing the competitive landscape. I see these as being the 3 biggest obstacles in obesity drug development. And let's just start with patient and site centricity. So, we have a few things that we put in place. One of which is developing a site resource plan. Essentially, you can put a body into sites to help them manage the patient flow and ensure the data quality. I think another thing that you can do is voice of patient. So you can survey patients about a particular protocol, or you can survey them in general. Incorporate their feedback, understand what's important to them, frequency of visits, number of assessments, type of assessments, and really start to fine tune your protocol so that it's as efficient as possible, as easy as possible to keep these people engaged. And then it just comes down to nothing magical. It's just education, connection, relationships between the patient and the site. That actually, while it sounds easy, can be hard because it takes a lot of work to develop relationships. I think it's something that CROs and the sponsors can drive from above, supporting the sites to do that, providing them with the educational materials, asking them, are you following up with your patients? How are your patients doing? That kind of stuff. And then, again, as I mentioned earlier, sites want to have the time to recruit. And I think perhaps as a sponsor, it's worth thinking of offering limits. So recruiting a certain number of patients over a certain amount of time, allowing all the sites to be involved. Some of the other things that we do at Fortrea, we have a site advisory board made up of sites as well as sponsors, and we're collecting their feedback, not only on performance, but also on things that they want to see as the world changes, as clinical development changes. We're getting their real-time feedback. And we've already put in place some things like monthly grant payments and single sign-on systems like through Advera, Viva, Longboat. So those are some ways in which you could be site and patient-centric. In terms of diversity, Obviously, you're going to have to start with feasibility. You're going to have to find sites with a diverse patient population. But within those sites, they have to have dietitians and they have to have PIs of the same race of the population you're trying to recruit. I think the reasons for that are obvious. There's a trust there. There's an ease there and a rapport that will help with the enrollment and the retention. If you're developing marketing material or working with patient advocacy groups, they have to obviously be directed towards the patients that you're trying to speak to. It has to speak their language. If there's something cultural, you have to be able to speak specifically to them. So very bespoke strategies to talk directly to the folks that you're trying to engage. And then of course, tracking enrollment. You have to be, it was something that burns so quickly, you have to be able to track in real time what's going on. And obviously that's something that we do. In terms of managing the competitive landscape, the first thing I would say, we talked a lot about site and patient centricity. You need to be a champion of it. And I think I probably said enough about that already. You need to build relationships with your sites. You know, you have to tell them, you have to show them your engagement in the field. You have to have that rapport that you can be able to call them as needed, not too frequently, of course. But building those relationships from the sponsor side is very important. I think a lot of times sponsors rely on CROs to develop those relations, but they don't really realize how valuable their own relationships could be. Obviously, if you're developing a GLP-1, you might want to go where there are no marketed GLP-1s. So checking out your competitive landscape is important. Understanding if you're going to do a US-centered study, you can look and see which sites are the most overloaded, and you can avoid them. So managing the competitive landscape through intelligence is going to be critical. And then you know, using open label extension studies, designing non-inferiority studies obviously are great for being competitive. And as I said earlier, you know, perhaps consider adding a few more sites, maybe adding a month or two, you know, to account for all these changes in this field. But, you know, overall, clinical development in obesity remains pretty straightforward. I think some of these nuances require some tweaks to the plan. You know, and hopefully this has been helpful. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Well, I said 50 minutes and it took us 53, so it was great. We have a few questions here, and I will try to summarize some of them, put them together. Interest in the contribution in weight maintenance. There are two questions related to weight maintenance. One of them is the contribution of resting metabolic rate and preservation of lean body mass in term weight maintenance. The second one, potential candidates for weight maintenance, and the third one that I think that this one can also be extended to any weight loss, because the question is, you think that studies focused on weight maintenance will be challenged by weight gain in the placebo arm. So I think that perhaps Eric can address the point about which component of the metabolic adaptation can be addressed and what are the potential targets. I think that you briefly mentioned that with the drugs that you know that are in development at present, and if the preservation of lean body mass, or there is any other measure that can prevent or mitigate the metabolic adaptation, any study that can say that. Can you take that one?
Yeah, I can start by saying, you know, I was part of the development of a consortium which is called POWERS. And this is a grant which came from NIH. And this is really to understand the physiology, not how do you achieve weight loss maintenance. You know, there is this registry of successful weight losers. It was developed by Rena Wing and Jim Hill. And, you know, we have learned from this epidemiological approach what are the markers of success? And it goes in all different directions, but those who are more successful are those who engage in exercise during their weight loss. And there was something I still don't understand, not skipping breakfast, for example. But this is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about having these studies which are ongoing now in Boston and New York, which is really to understand the physiology of the weight loss maintenance. What are the predictors? What they do in this study is, impose weight loss. It's mostly lifestyle and, cracking the whip on people. I don't know if there is medication or anything like that. And then when you achieve this 10% weight loss, you have measurement at baseline, measurement after the weight loss, and you continue these measurements. And then you see which one are the most associated with the weight regain or the diversity of weight regain. Now, the question is, there was a question about placebo.
Just one question, just to complement this, and then I can move to Peter to ask about placebo. But the question is, because the specific question is, if we reduce or minimize the lean body mass loss, can we somehow prevent some weight regain? And associated with that, obviously, we don't have those studies yet, but what you are saying, that exercise in that long-term study, I remember when I was in the obesity field, it started many, many years ago, but if continuous exercise is a predictor of weight maintenance, can we assume that preservation of resting metabolic rate with limiting fat-free mass loss can be associated with some prevention of weight regain as a component of the metabolic adaptation?
I think when you have exercise, there are two things. There's the energy cost of exercise, and you have it, and that's a benefit. But there is also this preservation of the drop in lean body mass, and the fat-free mass, the energy requirement for 1 kilogram. When we have DEXA, you have fat and what we call fat-free mass. The energy requirement of fat-free mass on average is 4 to 5 times that of fat mass. It means, yes, if you have bimagrumab on board and you don't lose, instead of losing 25% or 30% of fat-free mass, you lose 5%, you are going to be in better shape to maintain the weight loss. But still, I think that
this is the objective of this specific question, and yes, and we all agree. So we can think that in the future, a combination of these incretins or some of the drugs that are leading to some more fat-free mass loss with another compound that can preserve lean body mass can be an option in terms of potential combination. What do you think about using leptin for weight maintenance, for instance? We published a paper many years ago with post-obese patients that was very much aligned with what you showed recently. So leptin levels, even after 3 months of weight stability, are still very, very low in these patients. What do you think about potentially treating these patients with leptin after they reach the plateau?
Yeah, I think, the group in Colombia, Dr. Rudy Leibel and Rosenbaum, have been advocate of that, and they have produced a tremendous amount of data. The leptin story is unfortunate because it didn't work, and then you had this neutralizing antibody in a few people, and you don't want to cause obesity in people because you build up neutralizing antibody. But the strategy of leptin replacement, when you see this Biggest Loser that I showed, all of them had non-detectable leptin. If you were treating these people with leptin, you would be much better off. And in this POWER study, I believe that one of the strategies also to use leptin replacement, not leptin for weight loss, but replacement for weight loss maintenance.
Yeah, amazing. Peter, can you, in the last minute, because we are over time already, can you address the placebo arm, how we can manage to retain patients that gain weight?
Yeah, I read that question, and thanks for the question. That's not an easy one, and there's no magic bullet. I think it starts at consent. Patients need to be aware. Nobody wants to be surprised in the middle that, oh, you mean I could possibly gain weight? So you're going to have to be upfront and consent them appropriately, make sure they fully understand. And then it's education and engagement, like we talked about earlier. But you might have to take that to a whole new level because obviously people who are gaining weight are going to be very dissatisfied. Having the sites show appreciation, having little comfort kits when they come for a visit. You know, these are little things. In the past, we've had CEO videos created to be given to the patient to thank them, acknowledging that, you know, they're very important to the trial. I think things like that and staying connected are really the only way to complete a study like that.
Amazing. Thank you very much. I will hand over back to Ryan to finalize the webinar.
Well, yes, thank you all of you very much for this very insightful discussion today. For those interested in hearing more from Fortrea, you can register for their next webinar, Creating Software as a Medical Device Technology in the Ever-Changing Regulatory Environment, scheduled for Monday, September 30th. And you can use the link that I've sent in the chat box. Also note that if we couldn't attend to your questions, know that the team at Fortrea will follow up with you. Or if you have further questions, you can direct them to the email address that's up on the screen. I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from XTalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen as you exit, and your participation is appreciated as it helps us to improve our webinars. Additionally, I've shared a link to view the recording of today's event in the chat box, which you can also share with your colleagues so they may register for the recording here as well. For those watching via LinkedIn Live events, we encourage you to visit xtalks.com to register for this event and gain access to features such as viewing the recording and more. Now, please join me once more in thanking all of our speakers for their wonderful time here today. We hope that you found the webinar informative. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.